All right, so we're going to pick up with our 30th model. We left off with Thrain at 31. Just before Thrain, coming in at number 30 is Bard the Bowman, from the Survivors of Lake Town, or what's the other one? The Armies of Lake Town, the one with the
The
master.
Army of Lake Town.
Yeah, he can be in both. Uh, just ahead of him, narrowly edging him out, is Gimli, son of Gloin, coming in 29. This is Fellowship Gimli most of the time, sometimes Kingdom of Moria. Just edging out him in 28th is the King's Champion, who we've seen before from the Kingdom of Moria or the Kingdom of Khazad-dûm. In 27th, we have Radagast the Brown. 26th, we have Theodrin, Prince of Rohan. 25th, we have Eorl the Young, King of Rohan. In 24th, we have Boromir of Gondor. No, this is not the one with the banner. This is the Fellowship version. In 23, we have Durin from the Kingdom of Khazad-dûm. 22, we've got Beachbone from Fangorn. That's the one who strikes. And at 21, we have the Champions of Erebor on Chariot. So that's our next 10 that we've got as we work our way to the top 20 overall. What do we want to talk about in this spot?
I'd like to lead us off by talking about the King's Champion. I feel like maybe I have too high a view of the King's Champion from all this. Like, obviously,
you ranked him where?
I ranked him number 21, which was a good 14, almost 20 points places higher than both of you guys. So
I had him
he
at
would have been in
35.
the next set. And like, I feel like since he finished at 28, it's not like he was that far off from where I placed him. But I am just curious as to what you guys think about him. Because obviously, like, he's not mounted. That's just a general problem for dwarves unless you're part of the Erebor Reclaim / Iron Hill side of things. But I feel like everything else is great. You know, you get the fight 6, you get the strike, you get so many attacks. You can live for days. Even if you were to run out of your own fate points, you might still get more fate points. Like that, you know, it's just, it's insane how long this guy can stay in a fight, just churning and grinding people out in a list that has heavily armored dwarves that can shield along his flanks to make sure you're never really going to be trapped. You're always going to get the fights the way you want them to. Like, I feel like there's so much killing this guy can do for so long. And it just is curious that, you know, he barely broke the 30s for you guys, and he was at the tops of the 20s for me. So I'm just curious to see what you guys see about him, because I don't think I've ever used him, actually, now I think about it. I don't think I've ever actually played with the King's Champion. So just kind of curious what you guys think about it.
So I have used the King's Champion a lot. Kingdom of Moria, Kingdom of Khazad-dûm, you live, you know, first hero you take, even above Balin or Durin, is a King's Champion. You always, always, always take one, because you get the 2 banners and you need the banners. Here's what I've come to find with the King's Champion. He is a good mid-tier hero.
Mm-hmm.
The reason he's a good mid-tier hero is because, yes, he can strike from fight 6, but he can only do it twice.
Right.
And as good as that is, it means that you can take on something big, but you have to kill it in 2 turns. And if you don't, you then have to turn and start chewing through infantry, who you will chew through very easily, right? 3 attacks, fight 6, strength 5 with axes. I mean, yeah, you're going to eat stuff all day long if you want it. But, you know, I mean, by the same token, he only has, you know, 3 attacks at fight 6, right? I mean, so, you know, I mean, and he doesn't knock things over. So when you're trying to chew through things, if you run up against something with really good defense, like a Shagrat, you might do a wound to him every time that you trade blows. And he will strike for 3 rounds and you will not, right? And that's assuming that you don't have to use your might for anything else, right? So, you know, I mean, if he knocks you over, or, you know, if he can chew through all the fate and stuff that's on those heralds, I mean, you're kind of in a tough situation eventually with the King's Champion. So I like him a lot. I didn't have the heartbreak over him not like just barely. He was number 39 for me. He was just barely on the list. Didn't hurt my mind. He's a good hero, but he doesn't have big auric bonuses. He doesn't have the speed. He doesn't knock stuff over. So yeah, he chewed through guys about as well as other people did, and he ranked a good 10 spots above Thrain did for me. So that should be indicative as to how good of a hero he is.
So as a question on it, mostly because I'm trying to figure this out. I mean, Tiberius, you've mentioned in the past that like fight value was not like the number one thing you looked at. There were other things that played into it. Is it telling that the King's Champion, if he can survive those 3 attempts with strike, he now has the fight value advantage over Shagrat? And how,
So I,
yes, he can only strike twice, but being realistic between heroic moves and such, a lot of heroes only strike twice. So I guess, as I'm looking at it, like, is it really a big deal? Because, like, even if you choose not to strike and you lose a combat, how many wounds is Shagrat actually going to do to you past defense 9, even if he wins and knocks you over, which is not necessarily guaranteed, right?
yeah, so I looked up so I assumed one round of fighting, but he was fight 10 versus fight 9 for Shagrat. So with the higher fight value, you have a 78% chance of winning the fight, so almost 79, assuming that you're rolling 5 dice, which is 3 dice for the King's Champion himself, and re-rolling the 2 lowest. Is that right for having 2 banners, or should it just be 1? It
I think
should
it's
just
just
be 1, right?
one. Yeah, I
Should
think it's
just be
just
1.
one.
All right, so let
Mhm.
me change that because that number's not right. Let's see. All right, so you have a 73% chance of winning the fight, so long as you have the higher fight value, which you will have if you strike higher, or if you're both out of might and no one can strike. The surprising thing though is that you're only expected to do 1 wound every single turn. So if you win 3 out of 4 fights, and each time you do a wound to Shagrat, you know who's still around after 4 rounds of fighting? Both people, right? The expected number of wounds and stuff you're supposed to deal to the King's Champion from Shagrat? Not very many because of all those fate points you can roll, right? But you're not going to kill him, and he's not going to kill you. And when you compare that relative to heroes like Gwai here, who we'll talk about in a bit, or you know people like Elendil, Gil-galad, the guys you traditionally think about with killing, that lack of a +1 to wound really slows you down, and the lack of the knockdown really slows you down. So as great as the King's Champion is, he is really good against troops. He's a pretty decent guy to stall out the Balrog for a while. I've almost killed the Balrog twice with this guy. He's really good, but he's not really, really, really good. And we're going to come across in a minute. I'm going to talk about another dwarf hero who simply does the killing part better. And so even though his stats don't look quite as good on paper, when it comes to actually killing stuff, he does it much better. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's that.
I love the King's Champion. He's great. He's fight 5, strength 5, not fight 5. He's fight 6, strength 5 with the axe, and the axe is nice. But I mean, I don't have that many dwarves ahead of him, but there are dwarves that are ahead of him, right? So Thrain, who we already talked about, I've actually got Thrain a fair bit ahead of him because strength 4 with a Master Forged axe or Master Forged hammer is basically strength 5 with an axe. I mean, you're both going to top out at strength 6, and against even defense, Thrain's going to be better. And they've got the 3 attacks and the defense and all that other stuff. So like he's really, really good. And if you're looking at sort of value for model, like again, you're getting those 3 banners, those 2 3-inch banners, which is fantastic value. Defense 9 with 5 fate points is quite good. Like that's very, very good. But like Tiberius said, for the killing, like he's behind Durin on this list. I think that's right. I think he should be because Durin is also defense 9. And Durin's got a Master Forge two-handed weapon, and Durin's got a free bonus on top of a banner, which you're going to have because, like Tiberius mentioned, you're gonna, if you have Durin, you probably have a King's Champion as well. And one of the banners is chasing the champion, and the other one is chasing Durin the entire time. Because why would you not do that? And then, yeah, he's really, really, really good. Dwarf heroes are really good, but he's behind Thrain. He's behind Durin for me. I mean, I've got him behind Beorn in man form, who just barely didn't make this list. But he's fight 6-2 at strength 5, but he can do a two-handed weapon in Burly. So when it comes to killing models, I think he's going to be ahead. And it's sort of the lack of the two-handed weapon that holds him back for me in this rubric, on top of the fact that he can't mount. So I've got him behind Bard and Eorl the Young as well, just because they've got the knockdown. Radagast is ahead of him, Legolas on my list as well. It's a good model, but yeah, again, the lack of a mount at some point, there's a cap. And heroes with mounts, especially now that we're in a tier of, these are like good to very good heroes with mounts. Like, I'm just taking a look at the models that are ahead of him on the list. Radagast, Theodred, Eorl the Young, Boromir. Like, those guys hit like trucks when they're rolling 8 dice to wound, which they are doing a fair bit of time. And against a King's Champion, they would be. And so, and that's before we get to sort of the might issue, which held me back a little bit. 2 might is not 3. 2 might is good. 2 might with strike is great. But I did feel he was a little bit behind those mounted heroes and the really, really big dwarves. And of course, we're not even talking about the dwarves who can be mounted.
Yeah.
Which I think he's a fair bit behind.
No, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah. But
I don't feel like we need to belabor the point particularly much. I will note in passing, because I think this is useful, that even 6 to 8 dice to wound is probably only 1 wound going out against this guy, as he's D9. Most of these people are going to be strength 5. There are some exceptions to this. So at least within the context of, if the goal is Shagrat, even Shagrat knocking you down is 1 wound, right? So like, I feel like there's a lot of, and again, maybe this goes back to the same methodology I had as regards the twins. He's a very stable hero who's always basically going to be killing at the same amount, and there's nothing that the opponent can really do about it. There's not a lot of change, whereas with a hero who's mounted, for example, if you take away the charge bonus, they're very swingy. Sometimes they have a lot of killing power, sometimes they really don't. And the King's Champion just seems like the kind of person who, at the very least, you can count on him doing a couple wounds every turn, is what it seems like. So
let me just add one thing for the Defense 9, because I do think it's worth noting. So for the defense bonus to work, you have to be in base contact with both heralds. If you lose the fight, you have to back away. So you do have to be a little careful with your positioning on the King's Champion, because he's very easy to inadvertently trap, especially if you've got him sort of wedged. If you don't leave enough space between him and the guys next to him in the front line, you can trap him against, because you can only move 1 herald to back him away.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've done back away stuff with shield wall before. There are, you can do it strategically. It's not hard to get 2 models, if you can move them, to back a model away so he's in base contact with 2 of them. But you do have to be careful about the trap thing. If you've only got 1 model in base contact, he goes to defense 8. That is pretty good. But again, strength 4 with a +1 to wound, that's 5s. And if you're rolling 8 dice, you're probably going to get at least a couple of 5s. So you really want that defense 9 for the 6s. And if you got strength 5 with a 2-handed weapon, it's going to be 5s no matter what you do. And again, that's the difference in the power curve. Because there are dwarves who can get to strength 5 with a 2-handed weapon, or, one of them can get to strength 6 with a 2-handed weapon without even trying. and then you add heroic strength, like strength 10 with a two-handed weapon is in play for some of the really, really big ones. Again, he's really, really good. There's no shame in being a top 30 model, and that's your cap, especially if you got no horse. Like, that's fantastic. But we are on the spot where, like, you're graded on a curve from this point moving on, and the models you're graded against are all fantastic models, like this one is.
So while we're talking about really good dwarf heroes who can't take mounts, we need to talk about my man Gimli, who I actually wasn't planning on talking about, but since we're having this discussion, we need to do it.
Yeah.
I am curious where you guys evaluated Gimli from. Like, what list did you choose him from when thinking about, here's Gimli, what's he bringing to the table?
I looked at him from the Fellowship. I don't think I looked at the Breaking of the Fellowship because I feel like that's a pretty niche list for him. And I feel like unless you're running a 600-point tournament, most people are not going to use that because you're really hamstrung, or 600 or less, I should say. I feel like he's plenty good in the Fellowship. He's going to be capped because he's only got the base of 2 attacks with the +1 to wound, or he's going to have 3 attacks. And then to get any more than that, you have to put Legolas into the mix. And because I don't look at the 2 models as one, because I feel like they should stand on their own 2 feet, I looked at him as either a 3-attack model with no +1 to wound, or a 2-attack model with a +1 to wound. Both of those are good, but they are not Thrain, and they are not Durin, and they are not Dwalin or Dane or Thorin on mount. So, yeah, I had him ahead of Gloin, Champion Gloin, which I'm not 100% sure is right, but when you take the burly with the 3 attacks versus a throwing axe, I felt like that was basically a wash. And I gave the edge to Gloin because he's slightly more defensible, or Gimli because he's slightly more defensible, survivable.
Well, that's interesting. Centaur and I both had him in the mid-20s as opposed to your low 40s.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that Centaur...
I had him below all of the Thorns, and I think Gimli is a clear cut below all of the Thorns. As good
that
as
is simply not true, but okay.
No, it's true. Go ahead.
No, it's not. And here's why. Because I think Centaur, like me, evaluated him from the Breaking of the Fellowship Legendary Legion, because everybody in the community seems to think that when you run the Fellowship, you don't run Gimli. And I really don't understand that, except for the fact that the Fellowship has a lot of really good heroes that you want to put in, and you never have enough money for them all. And when you think you finally have enough money for them all, an errata comes through and says, well, now you can take Arwen. And you're like, oh, now I need 70 more points, right? And so Gimli, I think, has a really good case in one of 2 different lists, either the Breaking of the Fellowship list, because you will always have enough points for what you want, unless you are, in fact, playing the automated intelligence player for the TMAT GT that we're doing in the spring. I've played a lot with Gimli from that Legion. But even then, I think you bring Gimli, and here's what he brings to the table. First and foremost, in this evaluation, he counts as a banner, so long as there's a friendly model within 3 inches of him, which, in the Fellowship, you have no auric capabilities. Besides the tag team thing with Legolas, you don't really have any support capabilities with Gimli. Well, you do in the Legion. And just by having Gimli nearby, he doesn't even have to be fighting. Just so long as he's nearby, any other heroes who are near him are suddenly a little bit better at fighting. And when you're talking about little heroes like Merry and Pippin and Sam and Frodo, half of your models, they go from being not very good to actually being decent fighters because they can have 1 or 2 dice rolling with a might point behind it to make it work. Secondly, Gimli's got the hair, right? He's always got the hair, but he's got the 3 locks of hair from Galadriel in this one that allow him to turn those 3 dice to win the fight into 6, or turn those 2 dice in the fight with the +1 or +2 to wound into 4. And that means that your chances of getting the 6 are about as good as a model that's a really good model that's charging in on a horse, right? And with the ability to be fight 6 and strike, your ability to win fights is pretty dang good. And if you are going to be rolling potentially 4 dice looking for that 6 and able to get +2 to your wounding rolls, potentially from strength 5, you will chew through heroes of all shapes, sizes, and creeds. And the only thing, yes, that does take Legolas into the equation, but in most scenarios, most of the time, Legolas is going to have a kill on Gimli before he gets into any fighting. And when that happens, it's pretty reasonable that you're going to get +1 to wound, maybe even +2. So yeah, you could evaluate Gimli without Legolas, but I don't really think you can, because anytime that you're running Gimli, you're going to run Legolas. You may not always run Gimli if you know you're going to run Legolas, but anytime that Gimli's on the field, Legolas is already there. So I think he's a really good hero. I played around with which one did better, the 2 dice with +2 to wound or the 3 dice with +1 to wound. In both of my evaluations, it was better just to roll the extra dice. But I think he's a really good hero. This is about where I expected him to be. He was 25th on my list, so right at the middle line. I am a huge fan of him, probably a bigger fan than most. But yes, I think he deserves to be at about here, and I had him above Durin. I'll just go with that, which I know will cause people to go crazy, but I had him above Durin.
Yeah. Well, I don't want us to come up across as knocking a model. Like, Gimli is a fantastic model. I think he belongs. I don't think he's in the same conversation as Durin. I just don't. And I don't think he's in the same conversation as Thrain. I get that you can eventually power him up to be in that conversation, but by himself, he's not. And I guess maybe that's just a difference of where we looked at. I think he's on the same level as Champion Gloin for me, who can get 3 attacks with a +1 to wound. And I think that's pretty much where he tops out, because if you do the +2 to wound, he's got only 2 attacks. And 2 attacks with fight 6 with no option to shield, with no elven made weapon, is not great. And yeah, yes, you get a counter bonus, but that's true for all of these dwarves.
But again, here's how the breakdown worked. Durin, assuming you're not counting banners nearby, right? Durin's going to roll 4 dice to win the fight effectively, because he'll roll 3 and he'll re-roll the lowest for Durin's axe.
Yeah.
Gimli without the hair, you're right, is going to be rolling 2 or 3 dice. And when that happens, he's not in Durin's league. With the hair, he's rolling 6, which is more than Durin, and more likely to get the 6. And when it comes to wounding, both of them, assuming that Legolas has killed something, both of them are 3 dice to wound with +1 to wound. So put that way, the offensive capabilities are about the same, but with Gimli slightly more likely to win the fight if he doesn't get a 6 in the first set of 3 dice, right?
Again, the difference for me is that Durin can do that by himself, and Gimli cannot. And I feel like Durin's profile deserves to be rewarded for the fact that he can do it himself, and Gimli cannot.
Well, if you were doing kind of like a TMAT challenge, right? I mean, where they're the only model on the board, sure, why not? Yeah. Absolutely true, 10 out of 10. Realistically, on the tabletop, though, Gimli's not coming to the fight without Legolas. So,
Sure.
I mean, assuming that Legolas has managed to kill a warrior, that is
Yeah.
not a big stretch for me. So,
But
in my mind, now granted,
yeah,
I do have a very low opinion of Durin, not because Durin is a bad model. He's a very good model, but because he's a very expensive model, right?
yeah,
And so when I'm looking at like what heroes I want to include in my army, like it's not just that Gimli can perform as well as Durin does. It's that he can perform as good as Durin does for 60 points less, right?
sure.
Now, maybe that's 40 points more with Legolas, but if we were to evaluate the kills that Gimli and Legolas will do, you will beat Durin
Yeah.
every time, right?
I
So,
guess, yeah.
yeah,
That the reason I didn't go, and again, I understand the rationale and the Legion, that particular Legion opens up all sorts of potentials for Gimli. I guess that the reason I did not go down that route is that, I mean, if Gimli gets to bring a friend and that powers him up, Durin's going to have friends too. Like, he's going to be with a King's Champion.
or Hearthguard, lots of
Kind
Hearthguard.
of like
Yeah.
Durin and a King's Champion against Legolas and Gimli. And then you're like,
300
well,
to
but now
2.
the points don't average, so now we got to add extra points
Now
for
we
the
got to put in
fellowship.
Boromir. You think
Right, you got
Boromir and
Boromir.
Gimli and Legolas
And
could be?
then Durin's going to add Vault Wardens. And now Legolas is not wounding anybody. And so it just sort of spirals is the point.
Yeah.
And that's why, to some extent this is an artificial exercise. We are just talking about profiles that are not meant to be by themselves. They are meant to be in armies, and they do all sorts of other stuff. Gimli is a great model, and I agree. If at his maximum potential, he can get to the same level, maybe slightly better than Durin can when he rolls out of bed in the morning. And I thought that meant Durin was better. And that's how I looked at it.
To cap this off, by the way, since Durin, by the
Yes.
way, is number 23, so
Yeah,
he's in the same
it's
set.
Durin. Yep.
So that you guys kind of know my background with this, Gimli was more or less near the middle of my dwarf rankings. Like, I
Yeah.
didn't think he was as good as Durin. I didn't think he was even as good as Thror. Just because of the fact that Thror, starting with the 3 attacks, he's got really good chances to be able to knock people down. Like, in my mind, I was like, I think Thror is higher than Gimli. That's the way it is. But I also felt bad about placing Gimli, say, below guys like Glowin, for example, who was my number 25. Gimli was my number 24. And you basically end up with this. In fact, now I think about it, almost all of my 20s are dwarves, because within the range of the 20s, you've got like the King's Champion, you've got Durin, you've got Thror, you've got Gimli, you've got Glowin. I'll peek a little bit ahead. Thorin is number 20 on my list. You've got Thrain in this list. You've got, I think basically every single dwarf I ranked, with the exception of like Keely and Feely, were in this 20s range. And I think it's telling for me that Gimli was 24 or 25 when I was looking at it. And basically on a toss-up, I said Gimli over Glowin because the hair. And the chance for a banner as long as he's near a fellowship member, which he should be if he's doing his job right.
Look, and so, I don't want to short sell Gimli. Like, he's got throwing weapons. That is fantastic. Like, that's potentially an extra kill. He throws them pretty well, like a 4+. Like, that's pretty good. Strength 3. You're fighting against defense 5 troops, which you will a fair amount of time. Like, that's good. Like, at any chance you can get another kill. And then if Legolas has powered him up, then now you're going in after potentially getting a kill with 3 dice to win the fight, strikes with a +1 to wound. Like, he's good. I feel terrible about these sort of I feel like we're taking dumps on guys. We're not. It's just when you get to this range, you're really parsing, like splitting hairs almost, to try to figure out who's slightly better than who else. And I sort of feel like, again, I had Durin way ahead, but I mean, like you said, like you could very easily, I basically ended my list with fight 6 dwarves on foot. Like, my 40, I have the same thing as you, except instead of the mid-20s, I have them in the mid-40s because I've gotten mountain heroes ahead of them and all that other stuff. But yeah, I'm not going to knock anybody for having fight 6 3 attack dwarves who get various bonuses in the top 20. We have not talked about any of the mounted dudes yet.
We probably should.
I feel like maybe we should do that. So we've got Bard, we've got Radagast. We should talk about Radagast because he's sort of an interesting inclusion, and he actually made all of our lists. The worst he did was 35th. That's Centaur's ranking. I had him at 33, and Tiberius had him at 19. I feel like since he's a Fight 5 model who can't strike and only has one attack, only has one attack. In reality, he never does.
That is the truth.
Mention a little bit about why we all ranked Radagast as we did.
So I'll go first since I had him the lowest, and so I'll gush on him the least. Radagast can take a sleigh. So when I looked at it, I said, this guy does not have one attack. This guy has like 4 or 5 attacks, maybe 6. Sebastian adds a 6th, right? Or something stupid like that.
Yep. So it's 5 or 6, depending on whether you have to charge.
Right. So like this is, I mean, that's a lot at Fight 5. Like if your opponent doesn't have the fight value advantage, there's almost no way you don't roll a 6 to win the fight. And if you do win the fight, you're knocking things over. And the fact that you can move so far, so fast through basically any terrain is just ridiculous. Like this guy can really get around. And I didn't even look at him potentially on an eagle. Like I didn't even look at that. I said, it's good enough. I feel like, mid-30s is about accurate for where he should be.
He's Fight 7 on an eagle, isn't he?
Yes.
Yes.
That's what's crazy.
It's a weird scenario where you'd actually use the fight value of the mount.
Yes.
It's actually better than that. He's Fight 7 with the ability to immobilize the target he's going into. So not only can you be Fight 7, but you can keep a Fight 5 or Fight 6 hero from striking, which means you will stay at the higher fight value even when you get into the fight phase. Now, you don't have the staff, so you can only immobilize a handful of times, but it only has to work once, and then you're charging in with the 3 dice, you knock them over, you get the 6 dice, and oh my gosh, and probably at strength 7, because chances are if you took him on an eagle, you keep his army bonus, so 6 dice at strength 7, I mean, you just tear through everything at that point.
Yep. The last thing that I'll also mention about this, because this is big. So, we talk about getting the extra dice to win the fight and the knockdown when you're charging into stuff. Obviously, that's not true if there's a cavalry model involved in this thing. Radagast is one of the few guys, especially with the new rule, that talks about mounts resisting stuff on their own will points. I mean, he's one of the few guys who can say, and by the way, there are no opposing mounts anywhere near where I'm going. He's one of those few guys who can reach out and say, panic.
Have we checked, does panic say you target the mount, or does it say you target the model?
So all spells say you target the model. The FAQ recently said that Black Dart is the only one that says that if you Black Dart a mount and the mount doesn't have will, then you can't resist.
Okay, well,
every other spell, including Panic Steed, the rider can try to keep the mount from being taken out.
I think we need to check that because there are some spells, and Black Dart is one of them, that say you have to choose to target the mount or the rider.
No.
That's
Panic Steed says that you choose an enemy model.
Right, so that's my
and
question.
That model becomes dismounted and the mount of that model, please.
So they would be able to resist if that's how the spell is worded, because it's
that is how it's worded. I just looked it up. I will amend my statement then, but I will only amend it slightly because here's the deal: the vast majority of cavalry models that even have will points, which is not many, mostly have 1.
Correct.
You'll end up with a few heroes, the Aomers of the world and such, who rank pretty high on this list, admittedly, that we have here. They may have 2 or 3. But there's an awful lot of people who will be looking down the throat of save or lose your mount, and then I'm charging in here with a massive bunny sleigh that can easily tag 2, maybe even 3 people, depending on how you're arranged. Like, there's a lot you can do with this.
It actually gets better than that, because with the bunny sleigh, and we talked about this in our Spellcasters pod, so look up that one. If you get to charge enemy cavalry, you can turn sideways
Yep.
and throw in Nature's Wrath
Yep.
and knock down an ungodly number of cavalry onto their backs and then finish your charge. And it's like, well,
Yep.
I didn't have to channel my Panic Steed. I just had to throw in Nature's Wrath. And if you want to do damage, you could, of course, channel the Wrath and then do strength 3 hits in addition to all of the other, well, strength 2, strength 3 hits
Strength
to
2,
whatever nasty crap you're doing. So yeah, life is good.
Yeah.
I evaluated him on the bunny slate too with Sebastian, just because you do more dice, you have a better chance of winning. I did assume that he had immobilized Shagrat, so the fight value issue wasn't an issue, because chances are you're not going to charge into Shagrat till you've got him worn out of will. Because why would you take the chance? But he does quite a bit of damage. It was a surprise for me. I had him fairly high, I think 19th on my rankings. So yeah, he does a decent amount of damage. There are a lot of people that complain that your sleigh does not have the maneuverability that you would want from it because the base is so large. And so I've probably come to the conclusion you would probably want to take him on an eagle instead, just for the maneuverability of it, which we also talked about in the pod. But yeah, the sleigh by the math just worked out better, so that's what I took.
Let me just say something about the sleigh. So this is not a special movement model. It's not a war beast, and it is not a chariot. So you can do, I mean, yes, the base is large, and there are certain spots you may not be able to get it to fit into, but you can do the move 3 inches and then move 2 inches and turn yourself and then go in and on charge after you turn yourself another way, kind of a thing with it that you can do with, I mean, just basically it's an oversized cavalry model or an oversized monster. But you've got the flexibility. It's 10 inches. It's got woodland creature. The sleigh does.
Fleetfoot as well. It got
Well, no,
eroded.
the sleigh has.
It got eroded to Fleetfoot.
Okay, all right, that makes a little bit more sense. I'm like, oh, this is interesting here. So yeah, so it's good, and he's surprisingly killy on it. So that's why he's there. We've also got, in terms of mounted models, Bard, the bowman, at 30th. I mean, I don't know that we want to talk a whole lot about Bard.
He kills stuff.
We've also got Theodred, Aoral, and Boromir, Fellowship Boromir. I mean,
so I'll lead off one thought on this, and you guys can continue on this. This kind of lumps Bard the Bowman and Theodred together, so it kind of works. I confess these guys placed a little lower for me because of resilience. Both of them are not that defensible. Obviously, Bard does have that nice 3 wound, 3 fate combo, but he's got it past D5, which is not great. The fact that he doesn't have Horse Lord means that if his horse gets taken out, that's the end of his horse too. So like that will kind of affect his killing power a bit. And obviously, I don't know why you wouldn't take him with a great bow no matter what, because you want to have the shooting options. But I mean, once the horse disappears, a lot of his slaying potential does start to disappear too. So like great models, both of them are very good. But between Theodred only having 1 fate point to save both himself and his horse, and Bard having 3 fate with a low defense, and really an army that can't shield him either from incoming attacks because they're also pretty low defense. They just weren't going to place nearly as high for me because of the fact that I couldn't guarantee the horses would still be around. I couldn't guarantee the person was still going to be around. That was just the way it worked out. So
now, funny you should mention that. You have Bard fairly low, claiming his defense plays a part. Theodred fairly low because his defense plays a part. But you have Boromir of Gondor, who is max defense 6 with no fate, fairly high.
Yes, yep. I do.
So explain that one to me.
It's a very simple one. Right? I use the Breaking of the Fellowship Legendary Legion. So you've got Blinding Light keeping you safe from archery. You've got banner rerolls. You've got woodland creature so you can hide yourself behind terrain. And you've got an elven cloak to keep you safe from shooting from long range. So you close a lot of the difficulties with Boromir. And then all you have left is the slaying machine and melee combat. And if you don't take him in that list, then you can take him on a horse with Gandalf providing Blinding Light, which I feel like is basically just as good. So if you want the honest reason, the
More
simple reason is
reliable.
it's far more reliable, and more than that, a horse is basically, and this, I'm going to get chewed up for this, but I don't care. A horse for Boromir is basically a free fate point. It's one chance that somebody who would have hit you hit something else. They might not even wound it. So it's kind of like a recurring fate point. And if they dismount you, darn it, I'm Boromir still, and I'm still killing you. It doesn't actually change his offensive capability all that much. It does, but not by that much.
Oh, it does.
Yeah,
Oh,
does.
it does.
You're not going to take any flack from me for saying the horse is an extra thing you got to kill, because it is.
It is.
Yeah.
So that's the reason why.
I had these 4 basically all clustered together. I had Bard at 32. I'd got Theodred at 31. I've got Aoral at 29, and I've got Boromir at 28. So, and I got a mystery model who's coming up shortly, sort of smack dab right in the middle of them. I mean, the defense 5 thing for Bard is a thing. And to fully supercharge Bard, you got to have his children involved, which is always a potentially dicey proposition. So I felt like, the fact that Bard can go berserk and you may lose control of him was enough of a thing to downgrade him relative to these other heroes. Plus, he's like 200 points when you factor in the children and the horse and the armor and everything to get to supercharged Bard. And so when you look at him against like 115 point Boromir, 130 point Aoral, 100 point on the dot Theodred, I felt like there was some risk there. I got Theodred next. The +1 to wound, the re-rolling all failed to wounds is really, 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 really nice, as we talked about last time. But he is only 2 wounds with 1 fate, and he can sort of go berserk as well. And that may not be great. And you can play around that. It's much easier to play around that than Bards, because you don't have to charge a particular model. And I think Bard, once he kills the model, if he ever manages to kill the model, he's got to charge the nearest model every turn, right?
I think so.
Yes.
It's more debilitating. Theodred is less, but it's still a thing. Aoral has a potential might point that he can spend for free. It's not great, and if you roll like I do, you don't get that many free might points, but it's something, and he's slightly more defensible. That leaves me with Boromir, and my answer for this is, he's fight 6 with 6 points of might. And I felt that was slightly better than fight 5 with 3. And yes, he's only defense 6, and he's got no fate. And the others are defense 7, except for Bard. But he's fight 6 with 6 might. So that was my highly thought out ranking system for those models.
So I mentioned in the blog post that I did that I did not factor in might very well. And it is about to show, because I had Boromir at the bottom of this of these 4 models. And it's not because he's worse. He actually, the killing scores that he got were the same as what you get from Bard or Aoral the Young. They are not the same as what you get with Theodred, but we'll get into that in a few. The thing about Boromir is that he's not as survivable. We've already talked about that. He doesn't have the fate. His defense is about the same or worse. His mobility, if you put him on a horse, is about the same. But he doesn't have area buffs, right? You have a 6-inch area buff for Aoral the Young, because you're going to bring Sons of Aoral with him, so he has a 6-inch area buff, which Boromir does not. Bard has, of course, a 12-inch banner and fight value buff, which the other 2 do not have, so he's going to score worse on that. And by cost, you cost about the same as what you're going to pay for Aoral the Young, and less than you'd pay for Bard, right? But when you just stack all of those things up, the survivability hits, the empowerment hits, he's just not going to rank as well. And it's not that he's a bad killing model. He's not. He's good. But he's just not the same as the others. I think if I allowed him to boost his roll, effectively giving him a +1 to wound, he would have done better. but that would be committing to spending might to boosting wounding rolls. And
Yeah.
and you can do that if you win fights with the horn, where you didn't have to call a strike because you're like, well, I charged into 2 people who have bad courage. Let's just count on us winning. Let's not strike, right? I mean, then maybe I'd see a score go up, but I really couldn't do that. The thing about Theodred, though, the survivability is a thing. The reliability is a thing. He scored worse on the survivability stat than the other 2 big guys, but he kills stuff. Okay, like, I mean, Sharby. I was reading it today. Sharby just went to a tournament down in Brisbane, and it was a 200-point tournament, and so his good guy army was Theodred, a bunch of riders of Rohan, and a warrior of Rohan on foot with a bow. 9 models. And Theodred is one of those really great grenade kinds of heroes. And I don't think he's good as your army leader. I think you want him as a second hero. But I mean, he's fight 5 with strike, which is not great, but it's not bad. He gets 4 dice on the charge, which you should have 4 dice on the charge if you possibly can. And taken from a vanilla Rohan list, he is strength 5 on the charge. And when he knocks you over, he re-rolls all failed rolls to wound. Well, if you're wounding defense 7 models, you get 5s rerollable, which happens to be like a 56% chance of wounding somebody, which means that of the 4 people you could possibly roll dice against, you are probably killing 2 of them, and you may be killing more of them. And most heroes will actually struggle to kill 2 defense 7 models. And if you're facing defense 5 models, you will be killing 3 of them, maybe 4 of them, right? That's really good on a hero. That's really, really good on a hero. And so I happen to think Theodred is probably one of the most underrated heroes in the game. I evaluated him from his legion, so I said no strength 5, but I wanted that 12-inch empowerment bonus that comes from Arise Riders of Theodred. So I wanted that one because it made the score a little bit better overall. But yeah, I think he's a really good hero. I had him ranked. Where did I have him ranked? 15th. I had him ranked 15th, so he's better than Forlong. And I don't feel bad about that. I also don't mind that other people had him in the 30s. That makes sense. He's one of those heroes you just got to make sure you're controlling when he engages, but when he engages, you make sure gambling is right behind him, and everything will be fine.
Yeah. And we talked about him quite a bit. I mean, he was our top slayer for under 100, right? If my recollection is correct, or 100 or less, because he comes in right at 100. So no, he's really, really, really good. Rounding out this tier is Beachbone in 22. Both Centaur and I had Beachbone ahead of the other models that we've discussed. Beachbone is the Ent who can strike with 3 points of might. He's base fight 8 as well, is he not?
Base strength
Plus
8.
1 to wound, I think,
8.
as well, right?
Yep.
Yeah. I think
reroll failed, is it?
self-explanatory.
Against orcs, Uruks, and goblins?
Yeah. Oh, right. Plus he's got reroll all fails against orcs, Uruks, and goblins. So I think his combat prowess is pretty self-explanatory. I had him at 17th. And Centaur, in a rare move, you've actually got him ranked higher than I do.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love this guy. He was 15 for me, so just a little bit higher than you, but no, just top tier, top quality. Love this guy.
Yeah. Do you want to say anything, Tiberius, before I talk about number 21?
My math did not do him justice.
Okay.
My math did do justice to the model you're about to talk about, though.
Yes. All right. So the last model in this tier, and the last model before we get to our top 20, is the Champions of Erebor on Chariot, which is, I believe, the second most expensive profile in the game. You got Smaug, and then you've got the Champions of Erebor on Chariot, and then you've got Sauron and Azog with the Signal Tower. I guess Azog with the signal tower would be more expensive.
He can be up to like 450, but then you got
Yeah.
the Mumak War Leader as well at 400.
Right, and the Moonbach Board Leader at 400, right, and then you're into your Balrogs and your dragons and all that other stuff. This was my number one. I'm just gonna say it because we're talking about it right now. And I don't know that it's worth talking about it at this point in that context because we haven't gotten to the models that are also in consideration for the number one. Without spoiling anything, they're exactly the models that you think they're going to be. Yeah. So I had this ranked first overall. The reasons are it is a chariot, so it does 3 strength 6 hits on the charge. It is a 8 or 9 attack chariot, depending on if it charges. It is a fight 6 chariot, as long as you don't have frickin' Dwalin shooting in while you're in combat, which you shouldn't do if you need a fight 6. And you've got 3 dwarves on it, all of who can strike, with 3 points of might behind each of them. And if you happen to botch, which is unlikely, rolling 8 or 9 dice, you knock things down. And oh, by the way, I think the chariot is strength 5 because Dwalin is on it, which means
Well, the
that
chariot is strength
the chariot
4.
itself is strength 4, but the
But
model,
I think for purposes of monstrous charge, I think
for
it's strength
purposes of
5.
monstrous charge, right?
Yep.
Which means you're going to knock down. You actually will knock down strength 4 mounts, which the normal chariot can't.
Does not do.
I don't think, which is, I think, an oversight on the part of the chariot. I don't know why it can knock down a horse, but it can't knock down a warg. I don't know that that was an intentional design choice, but that's how the rules work. Not so with this particular chariot. So I know it has mobility issues. It does. But I did not originally have it ranked first, and I sort of hemmed and hawed. But I mean, we'll revisit this, I'm sure, when we get to, well, I'll revisit this when we get to the top models, because I'm sure someone's going to ask me, well, why isn't this, model number one? It's because those top models can't kill this thing. They just cannot. Evil has some that can, but good does not have the model. Any of the other models on this list, you take the chariot against that model in a mano a mano, and I don't know that there's none of the other models on this list that feel good about fighting the Champ's Chariot. The Champ's Chariot feels very good about fighting all of these models, with the possible exception of maybe some of the monsters. But even the monsters, you sort of like your chances because, I mean, they're rolling 3 dice to fight this thing, and you've got 8. So
I will say up front that I think that it is a fantastic killing machine, lest that be lost in translation. I will note, and thus I'm taking the opportunity to say this here, that the reason why it is not near the top of this list is because I didn't rank it.
Yep.
Which is why it fell. It had 2 votes that were within the top 10, and then it had a big goose egg from me. So I'm just going to come out and say that the simple reason why is because I evaluated the profiles in the book. So I evaluated the Iron Hills Chariot, and I evaluated under the captain because I thought, hey, that's a profile, and it seems to work. I'm not going to take 3 really good dwarf profiles and another pretty good dwarf profile, put those on a 5th profile, and then call that one profile. So that's the only reason why I didn't rank it. I do think that perhaps the mobility issues are not only issues. I think that they can be very serious issues toward the killing power. A person who knows how to fight against a chariot, taking any of the top 10, I think could do a very good job against the chariot. But we can get to that when we get to that. because there is a very sneaky sort of maneuver that works really well against chariots that I have definitely thought about. You've been very gracious, Rythbryt, in that I haven't had to fight your chariot yet. But when we do, I intend to use exactly what we'll talk about a little later. So I will simply leave it at that.
So I have not gone into much detail so far into like the scores that we got, but I think this is one of those models that bears actually telling the scores. So here we go. My hero slaying and troop slaying scores were based off of how many expected wounds you're supposed to deal given how likely you are to win the fight. The Iron Host Chariot got an 8 out of 10 for hero slaying and a 10 out of 10 for troop slaying. And the reason it gets the 8 out of 10 for hero slaying is because you don't knock a strength 5 hero over, right? If you did, you'd be pasting this guy.
You would not
right?
knock a strength 5 cavalry hero over, but you would knock a strength 5 or below infantry model over.
Oh.
It's a cavalry. I mean,
Give me a
it counts
sec,
as
then.
it's got the charge bonus.
According to the rule, it counts as a cavalry
Oh, no, you
on
know
the
what
charge
I
when it's
did?
charging.
Yeah.
Is what it does.
But you know what I did is that I had to look at how many attacks each guy was doing. And you're right, I didn't double them.
Yeah, they would be doubled.
Okay.
For Shagrat.
All right. So let me do some quick math.
No,
I'm not going to edit my score. He already ranked very high for me, so I don't feel bad about this at all. Okay. All right. Yeah. So you're a 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10 for hero slaying, 10 out of 10 for troop slaying, without any questions. Very, 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 very not close. Here's the thing, though. The mobility score, of course, you're going to suffer on.
Sure.
Because not even counting the restricted movement that you get on this thing, but just the fact that it's being pulled by goats, right? You compare it to other, spoiler alert, a lot of my top 10 heroes, of which this guy was a top 10 model, a lot of the top 10 models are riding horses. Yeah. And in my metric, the farther you go, the better your mobility score is. And oh, by the way, these are 8-speed things instead of 10-speed things. So
not to derail you, I just want to flag for the listeners that he said most of his top 10 are riding horses.
Most. Not all, but most.
Not all.
Most of
Go
them.
ahead. Continue. Actually, that's true of mine as well, by the way. I've got a couple of top 10s that are not on horses.
Actually, every single one of my top 10 heroes is mounted.
Oh, well, never mind.
Every single one.
And that are not. So never mind. Carry on.
Every single one is mounted. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fat finger that thing in. And we're going to figure out how this guy ranks. Okay. All right. So Okay. All right. Yeah. So giving it the score that he actually deserves, he should be about 6th on mine, which wouldn't change too much here in the rankings. He was like 8th before.
Well, that would push him into the top 20.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So giving him the credit his mobility score is going to suffer. The empowerment score is going to suffer too, because while all 4 of these heroes are great, none of them have special big buffs that you see, like people like, Gil-galad and, Aragorn and stuff, right? I mean, they have these bubbles that are more than just a stand-fast bonus, right? They've actually got some kind of thing that they're giving to their army that is making it better. And these guys simply don't have. So in that category, they're going to suffer. The cost category, of course, is in the tank, right?
Sure.
That doesn't mean you can't be a top 10 hero, because a lot of the top 10 heroes have really high costs. So it just means that if you're trying to compare against other top 10 heroes, you're already starting a little bit behind. Impact score, full 10. You've got so many special rules on this thing that are good for killing things. You got the monstrous charge. You've got Dwalin himself is a 10. So you start stacking on rules like monstrous charge and stuff like that, and it's only going to get better. So, there's categories where, you're going to win. There's categories where you're going to lose. The survivability score on this one is not particularly great because, you're not expected to take that much damage. But, the heroes that you have, there's no rerollable fate or anything like that. So, depending on who's getting hit, you might stop a wound or 2 with your fate, because you're all 1 or 2 fate heroes, right? But this is one of those models where I almost feel like even my metric system, which factors in a lot of different things, is not a good way to evaluate it, because if this model were to take on any one hero in like a TMAT challenge kind of construct, I don't think anyone would be rooting against the chariot, like you'd kind of have to be facing like Sauron or something before you're that worried about being like, yeah, we're going to run over you in 2 rounds. And then that's it.
Yeah. Even Sauron is not thrilled. Like, I agree. Like, and again, like I said before, evil has monsters and big combat heroes that can absolutely fight this thing, and some of them can fight it before it gets to them, and that's sort of the worst case scenario for the chariot. Good is a lot more limited when it comes to that, and that's why, and it happens to be a good model, so that's why it's at the top of my ranking. Now, Centaur was making a motion when you're talking about bubble buffs. Are you going to say something about Longbeard?
That is exactly what I was going to talk about. So obviously the one advantage that the chariot does get is you do get the Longbeard ability on Balin, which is not a bubble ability, that's to be fair. But one, I would argue for an Iron Hills / Erebor reclaimed army, getting priority is really big, especially since it's going to save you might points that you would otherwise need to spend calling things like heroic moves. Getting priority when you have a chariot is even more important. And I think that the benefit of that compounds, not just for the army, but for the model itself, both to be able to, run over people and actually get your kills in through the impact hits. But in addition to that, if you do find yourself in a situation where you're up against a fill in the blank that you don't like, at least you do have an opportunity to get out of there, albeit 8 inches in a very restricted amount of movement. So like, there's not a whole lot of ways to do that, but at least you do have that as an ability. So
yeah. Let me just make a note on that as well. Just sort of two comments. I agree that is something that's worth thinking. You do have to spend Balin's will point to make the Longbeard work. That's sort of a blessing and a curse. A blessing in that you can do it more than once per turn, and if you happen to have Gandalf in the list as well, like Matt Iverson has run before in his Champ's Chariot, where you can have Gandalf refreshing will. That's not the name.
strength and will.
Yeah. On Balin, you can actually do it more than that. It does mean if you're playing against Magic and you don't happen to have Gandalf in tow, that Balin is probably not Longbearding, because he's going to need that will to keep the chariot moving. Having said that, I agree, you generally want the chariot moving, but this chariot actually does quite well even if it is not charging, because yes, you don't get the knockdown, but you've still got 8 attack space as long as you've got the 3 combat dwarves in the fight. And 8 attacks from fight 6 is with the possibility for striking as well. I mean, unless you've got 4 wizards who can all cast Immobilize, you cannot prevent the chariot from moving and striking in the same turn. Like, you can do one of those things. You can stop it from moving, but you need 4 wizards to successfully transfix everybody. If you don't, it can either move or strike, sometimes both. So it's very hard to lock down. And I mean, at fight 6, it's going to mow through most troops. So if you want to actually kill it, you have to send a hero at it. Because unless you got Galadrim Guard, you can get to fight 6, or King's Guard, or some of those other sort of fringe troops who can sort of tie it on fight value. You're going to have a hard time beating it. And then typically those models that have really high fight that are troops can't wound defense 8 with a defense 8 chariot in the way. So it just becomes a sort of, it's a ticking time bomb is what it is. So.
Can I ask one quick question on
yes.
the monstrous charge here for the chariot?
Aha. Yes.
I don't want to belabor this.
Yep.
The rules for monstrous charge say that you knock down. This is on page 106 of the rulebook for those following along at home. Second paragraph for monstrous charge, top left. This model will knock to the ground any model that it charges, including cavalry and other monster models with a lower strength value than it, even if the charged model has a strength of 6 or higher. The rider of the cavalry model will automatically suffer the knock flying as a result of the Thorn Rider test. That does not seem to me to say that you will knock over a strength 5 model if you are strength 5. But I assume that the chariot is cavalry. And the cavalry rules for knock to the ground say that you knock down all models that are not monsters or have strength 6 or more. So
that's
it's monster
my
charge paired with
well,
cavalry, right? That allows you to do that?
That's my assumption as well. Now, I admit that the wording on that is not 100% clear. What I don't so the whole point of monstrous charge is that you're supposed to be. It's a cavalry. It's the same as a cavalry bonus. You get the +1 attack on the charge, and you get a knockdown. But the difference is that you now have the chance to knock down things you can't normally knock down with a cavalry model. Like, I think that's the point of the rule.
I guess it's that first paragraph that I didn't read, which says if a model with the special rule charges, it will gain the knock to the ground and extra bonuses as if it were cavalry, with the following exceptions.
Yeah,
so,
and the question is, I think there's a comma or something missing. Like, what I think, if you take those two paragraphs together, I think the best reading, and I think the way it's played most of the time, is you knock down, you treat it as a cavalry model because it is. It gets the knock to the ground. Knock to the ground takes care of infantry that are strength 5 or below. In addition to that, that's the next paragraph, you can also, as an exception, knock down monsters and cavalry that are of lower strength than you. I think that, because it seems kind of weird to say, it's a cavalry model, you get +1 and knock to the ground with this exception, and the exception is, well, you can't knock any infantry down now unless they're lower strength than you. Even though you are a normal horse, you could do that. I don't think that's how it's supposed to work, but I agree. There's some sort of punctuation or something that is missing to make that perfectly clear. The other thing that I will add as well, and I know Matt Iverson alluded to this in one of the podcasts that he did recently about unorthodox lists, where he talked about this chariot, is if you are concerned about that, this is one of those situations where you might have, I want to double check here. I'm going to pull up my Champions of Erebor here, where you might actually have Philly call heroic strength, because it's a single model. You take the strength of the way cavalry models work and these jumbo models is you sort of mix and match the characteristics. You normally use Dwalin's strength at strength 5, but if you've got a Feely who heroic strengths up to strength 6 or 7, you might be able to knock down an eagle. You might be able to knock down a fell beast. And of course, with Dwalin, you've got to, if you decide to go with Dwalin, if you don't need him for striking, you might want him to have the strength, the chariot itself. And again, this is another one of those weird interplays that's not really addressed by the rules or the page and a half of special rules when you add the champions to the chariot. But, for purposes of figuring out what the strength of the model is for purposes of monstrous charge, under normal circumstances, you would take the strength of whatever is on the mount. And if you happen to have a model on the mount who's strength 7, or in Dwalin's case, potentially strength 8, and it works like it normally would for a mounted model, you might be able to knock down stuff. There might not be a question about being able to knock this stuff down, is my point. So
that's a good point.
But that's not settled. That's sort of a gray area in the rules. But it's another reason why, again, Evil's got some stuff that's not so fussed about fighting this, but in a one-on-one, and of course in a real points match game, you never have a one-on-one against a big hero on this thing unless something goes terribly wrong. But I think most of the good heroes are worried about fighting this.